team. There's, and look, I said this yesterday, and people were like, well, no, they mentioned something about handling it internally. What I meant by that was the relationship between Juice and his teammates, if it is damaged, and I don't know that it is, because I think most people love Juice around the building. If there's any damage that's been done, that's got to be handled in the freaking locker room. It's not for us to decide. If there is anything like that, they'll have to fix it. But I think it's a lot easier to get somebody to embrace the prodigal son than it is to go bring in someone new in this situation, given the landscape at that position in the portal this year. What's up, Brad
Crawford?
Hey, fellas, how y'all doing?
Good, Brad. Good to have it.
Go ahead, Brad. We've been talking about Juice. You got anything on it?
I think it's very poignant what JC said about those inside the program still like him, and that's the key in all this. There seems to be a segment of the South Carolina fan base that doesn't want Juice back, and I understand that based on what's going on, but you have to understand South Carolina is not in a position against two programs coming off double-digit win seasons to be telling a top-end wide receiver one like Juice, we don't want you anymore because you're asking too much. Of course they welcome him back, and anything said opposite of that is just false. That's the nature of the beast in new college football, unfortunately. And like I said, I understand the portion of the fan base's frustrations. Ole Miss and Texas, you guys have mentioned, are two that we're all keeping an eye on. But my sources in Oxford don't feel as good about Juice Wells as they did, say, 72 hours ago about a possible commitment. And you look at Texas, those I've talked to, their number one target in the portal is not Juice Wells. It's a Houston kid. And they obviously want to add Juice too, but the Houston kid's probably going to be a cheaper route for Texas, and they already got some guys coming back next year. So I think as, Juice hasn't announced anything yet, but as the days wear on and the closer we get to next week's early signing period, the chances are growing that Juice could return to South Carolina.
Yeah, I agree with that. I totally agree with that, Brad. And like you said, hey, look, they're inside that building. They'll figure it out. Mm-hmm. They'll figure it out. I mean, I understand why people look. If I was a teammate, knowing what I know, we'd be having a conversation, and it'd probably be a little bit more than that. Let them work it out, though. That's what it's all about. They're men. They'll figure it out. And you've got a coaching staff that understands the same thing that you just said. Like, look, we just went 5-7. We're about to debut a quarterback who's going to start his first career game against Old Dominion next year. Sure would be nice to have an All-American catching passes out there to help him kind of get his way along, right?
Oh, yeah. This has been a very strong portal haul, too. I want to mention for Shane Beamer. Even if he doesn't retain Juice Wells, I don't think he's done yet either. No team in college football has flipped the running back room like South Carolina has done. I actually just spoke to Jordan Waters, and the Gamecocks are still in contact with him, the Duke running back. And like JC mentioned earlier today, I do think South Carolina is looking at a third running back to take. They're going to sign a quarterback, probably another wide receiver. So this is a top 10 transfer class right now that could be even better this time next week.
We were just talking about that a little while ago. I want to get another quick comment from you on that, because the rankings only matter if you fill your needs. Like, sure. If you don't fill your needs, and you can look at rankings all day. You might have brought in 17 corners, but you don't need 17 corners. But Carolina, Brad, as of the end of the season, when Juice announced he was going to transfer, obviously Leggett was leaving. You knew what was going on in the running back room. You had to add there anyways. And then all of a sudden, Mario Anderson decides he's going to do whatever the hell he figures out to do with himself. And then we knew the defensive tackle position. Those were the three at the top. You're not going to take good player. You're not going to not take good players anywhere, but those were the three. And then we need a backup quarterback, or at least somebody to come in and compete with Lenoris, who's got some time in college football. But here's my point: of the five that they have, they've addressed the needs. They're about to double down on addressing the needs, and then they're going to address it on top of that when they add a quarterback. Right now, it could be AJ Swan.
And it's not like this is a portal cycle, JB, where there's a ton of high-end running backs. The Gamecocks have got commitments from probably two of the top six right now. And if they were to get Duke's Jordan Waters, he's a top 10 guy at the position for me too available. So I I don't think there should be much worry offensively heading into January if they're able to sign 3 running backs. Dow Loggins, this time last year was looking at a converted wide receiver as his first string running back, a Newberry kid that had not played major college football yet, and then Juju McDowell, who is just too small to play, a significant carry SEC guy. But there's not going to be a lot of mystery back there, I think, when the Gamecocks open spring practice, if they do have 3 new scholarship guys. And like I said, I expect them to add a third ball carrier, probably another wide receiver. You would like to get a wide receiver 1. They're high on the Coastal guy, but I'm not sure if he's a wide receiver 1 at the SEC level. But I do think Beamer and his staff can sleep easy during the holidays with no depth concerns at those spots.
Yeah, I'd like for him to add a receiver or 2 as well. And
Here,
there's some possibilities out there. I'll just say that.
Can I ask the 2 of you a question on this real quick on the receiver situation, or I mean on the ranking situation? If Juice Wells recommits to South Carolina, does that affect their transfer portal ranking since he's in the transfer
That's a darn
portal?
good class. Then you're talking about a top 3 class if they sign who I consider top.
You get credit for him again, huh? That would be crazy.
Because if that's the thing that gets the fan base juice, then every year Shane needs to take his top 5 players, tell them to go in the transfer portal and recommit to the Gamecocks, and let's have that number 1 transfer class every season.
Man, back when I was at Rivals, we counted guys, and we fixed it at 24/7. We counted guys twice. Like we had no way technically to take gray shirts because you wanted to calculate it on signing day, and then the gray shirts would technically arrive in the next class. So I remember one time Alabama got, and Auburn fans went nuts. Alabama got credit for the same 5-star kid 3 times, and dude never played. He was just a bust. It was back during the Shula era. I'll have to look up the exact player, but he gray shirted, and then he got hurt, and he gray shirted again. So he's 2 years delayed enrollment, and finally, and he counted all 3 times. It was the high school ranking. It was crazy. Yeah, I think. I think with Rocket Sanders, tell me about Rocket Sanders, because there's some discussion in the chat box about this. And I'll remind everyone, football development sometimes isn't linear, especially when you're dealing with injuries. Everybody seems to forget about that, like when they trash Carolina's O-line, next year's O-line preeminently. They're like, oh, well, still these guys were walking around on one leg. Talk about Rocket 2023 versus Rocket 2022. I think it's noticeable on film, but give us your insight into kind of what went into his struggles in Arkansas this year.
Well, and I'm going to say this too, Jay. So for the folks worried about the Gamecocks offensive line and if Rocket can have a 1,000-yard season, the Arkansas offensive line was supposed to be a strength under Sam Pittman. It's been anything but. They haven't had a good O-line in his several years there so far. And Rocket 2 years ago had 1,400 yards behind a not-so-great line. This past season, obviously, he was nicked up with a couple injuries. I spoke to one of our Arkansas writers. He thinks Rocket played too heavy last season, and he lost some of his explosiveness because he played at 235, 240. I don't think he's going to play that heavy at Carolina. He's going to probably be a 225 guy. And at 6'2", 225, I mean, that's exactly what you're looking for in a quick SEC running back. He's also a good threat out the backfield, just like Attaway is. And, we're going to see a RPO heavy offense next season. Lenore's going to run the ball a little bit too. So I think it'll be interesting to see if this 2024 Carolina offense looks a lot like the Arkansas 2022 offense. And I found it interesting because Dow Loggins was the O-line coach tight ends coach, 2 years ago at Arkansas when Rocket had those 1,400 yards. And I asked the Arkansas source, did he have a hand in play calling? And he said unofficially no, but
officially no, you mean?
Right. He thinks he did. So okay. I think we're going to see ground and pound next fall.
There's a lot of Arkansas
can I add
stuff
something to that
in the playbook, by the way?
I want to add something to that conversation with Rocket Man. Anybody know who one of the assistant strength coaches is now at South Carolina? Jamil Walker, who was the head strength coach at Arkansas when Rocket Sanders was in prime shape in 2022. He came over and joined the Gamecock staff prior to this past season in 2023, working along Luke Day. You think he doesn't know Rocket Sanders inside and out and what he does and doesn't do well and what that body's supposed to look like? He's the one that trained him when they flipped him into the running back room and he became an All-American. I mean,
Yeah,
and that's one name that has not been brought up.
Tackles. Like nobody broke more tackles 2 years ago than Rocket Sanders. Like I said, he played behind a line that he wasn't getting 3.5, 4 yards of carry before first contact. He was having to make guys miss as soon as he got the handoff, which is what Gamecock running backs failed to do this past season. I blame a lot of the running game struggles this fall on the offensive line, but it was a talent issue too. No disrespect to the guys that were in that room.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's a great point.
There were some plays too, especially when DeCarrion was getting the – because I think as far as playing too heavy goes, there's an example of guys playing too heavy. Even early, he'd have a hole, he'd hit it. It's a 4 or 5 yard gain, but he was getting tracked down from behind. Rocket Sanders goes through that same hole. The band's playing. I mean, even last year, Brad, and he was a step slower when you watch his game when he was healthy against Florida. 18 carries, 106 yards. Obviously did not have the same elite explosiveness, but he had that make you miss, like you were talking about, the tackle breaking ability and stuff in that Florida game. And you watched him, and you're like, yeah, man, that guy, he can make things happen. And, I think he accelerates when he's in his prime as well as anybody, whereas, a less talented back is not going to have that ability. You also mentioned being elusive in the backfield, making the first guy miss. I saw that really in both years, highlight tapes with him over and over and over again.
He also runs behind his pads, JC, and the Gamecocks haven't had a back like that. And I mean, probably since Mike Davis. Lattimore obviously was the strongest at doing that, but he's a guy that delivers a hit and can withstand a hit and then get more yards. And South Carolina badly needs a back who, on 2nd and 10 falls forward for a couple of yards when the play breaks down. They just haven't had that, and probably led the SEC the last 2 years in, negative or zero game plays.
I hate to do this to you because I generally agree with everything you say, but I'd say maybe since Kevin Harris sure was special in 2020. I don't even know if they would have gained 1 yard the entire season collectively as an offense without Kevin Harris, running for 121 yards per game or whatever it was in 10 SEC games. That was pretty impressive. Brad, where do you think they've got 5 guys now? Well, if you want to include Jerome Simmons, he's a JUCO guy. That's how we used to track transfers. But Jerome Simmons, so we can throw 6 in there. But where do you think this thing goes next? And I guess, actually, let me ask that differently. A.J. Swan is a guy whose name continues to come up. We've watched him play for 2 years at Vanderbilt. What type of fit do you think that would be in this QB room, and how would it help Gamecock football?
I think he's a good fit. I think he would challenge Lenoris but not start. But he's also a guy that, in case Lenoris gets hurt, you have a guy who has started pretty much his whole career at the SEC football level. And there's not a lot of those available right now in the portal, by the way. I want to make one quick note, too, on KJ Jefferson. I haven't totally slammed that door yet. And everything I've heard from sources is KJ is still planning on entering the portal. The problem with that is his market value is not what he or his representation thinks it is as a 3-year SEC starter. He's a guy that I know I've told JC this, that I think is comparable to Lenoris Sellers, same kind of body type, same RPO base passer. But KJ is looking for a fit where he comes in as starter, and Gamecock staff would definitely not guarantee that if he was an ad. But I think A.J. Swan right now, there's a reason why he's been on campus for 48 to 72 hours. That's the guy that I think the Gamecock staff wants to go with now that KJ and a few others have kind of dragged their feet this cycle. But there's going to be some more quarterbacks into the portal too. We just saw Malik Murphy yesterday make it official, and he's probably top of the line right now. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets a bevy of major elite offers.
Do you anticipate? So we're 6 days from signing day, and we've got the portal until the end of the month. Do you anticipate changes on South Carolina's coaching staff?
So I think Shane Beamer has made the right move in not announcing any yet if he has made that decision. I know at the end of the season, after the Clemson game, had Shane Beamer listened to the Gamecock fan base, they probably wouldn't be where they are right now in the transfer portal with a few of these commits.
Okay.
Montario Hardesty being, the number one guy mentioned there. And then you look at Clayton White as the DC. Next year's a contract year for him. It expires at December 31st, 2024. And that 3.35 the last 4 or 5 weeks really made South Carolina's talent on that side of the ball play a lot more loose, and they played a heck of a lot better as a defensive unit as a whole. So I think Clayton White's safe. I don't know if Shane Beamer's going to make any changes, but if he signs a top 10 portal class and that staff collectively feels good about this roster heading into the new year, maybe you stick with the staff you have and let it ride through next fall.
Brad Crawford, 24/7 Sports. Go ahead, JC.
No, I'm with. This is kind of what Beamer does, though. He's not in a hurry to do changes. And I think there's something to be said for that philosophy. It's not what I would do. I'm kind of a let's have a day of reckoning after the Clemson game kind of guy, But if people think back on it, Steve Spurrier handled it the same way many, many times. 08 was the exception because I think things were just so bad at the end of that year after getting beat by Clemson. Dabo gets the job. There was just some changes that had to be made. And Spurrier, of course, fired John Hunt, and David Reeves left and went to Tennessee, and blah, blah. The list goes on and on and on. But Spurrier usually would just like, well, and you'd be sitting there and you'd ask him about a play. But see, usually Carolina's getting ready for a bowl. Everybody's happy. And he's like, oh, shoot, we're not going to talk about that right now. We'll get on that later. Fred Chatham literally got fired without anybody telling. Just all of a sudden they hired another assistant. Ray Richleski gets hired. And, Freddie, well, shoot, that we only have now, and somebody's got to go. And so people think back to it. Spurrier was kind of the same way. Even Muschamp gave Kurt Roper some time to kind of look for something, although it was imminent, and he certainly wasn't coaching the bowl. So I don't know, man. I think remember Brian McClendon was still on staff at Carolina after Bobo was hired. Even Muschamp wouldn't even address it. I'm not going to get into that now.
And even last year, Shane let Marcus Satterfield's best friend hire him out west,
right?
Rather than announce he's out. So
I would have written him a letter of recommendation. Oh, I got to ask you about that. WTH, is he going to get Kyle McCord and Dylan Raiola?
So it sounds like Kyle McCord is going elsewhere, and Fran Brown, the new head coach at Syracuse, the top-rate recruiter at Georgia last season, may sign Kyle McCord.
Wow.
That would be.
I like Fran, man. I think he's real, dude. He's a real dude.
But yeah, Kyle McCord visited Nebraska on Monday, and whatever conversation he had with Matt Rule or Marcus Satterfield, man, didn't go too well. It sounds like, but they are about to flip Dylan Raiola, and
that is going to happen.
This is pure speculation here, but if they do flip Raiola, I think there's a conversation between Satterfield and Raiola that this is your job next year, and probably Kyle McCord wanted nothing to do with that. I would think.
All right, but I want to, since we've only got about 8 minutes, we got Derek Scott coming up at 1:05 today, so we want to make sure we get him on time too. So I'm going to squeeze in everything I can in the next 8 minutes here with you. Elsewhere in the SEC, who is just, when it comes to the transfer portal, needs to make it happen, but just isn't making it happen?
I think Texas A&M, man, has lost 19 players heading into that bowl game, and we're talking about probably 8 defensive starters, and like 5 are in the portal now. 3 are going to the NFL. I think it's very interesting to see that not only Gamecocks target LT Overton, but Fidel Diggs is another guy who led the team in havoc plays last season. I don't know what Mike Elko is going to have in terms of a too deep defensively, and that's his expertise on defense. They love Connor Weigman there. Haven't taken a quarterback this cycle, but this portal needs to improve for A&M. And then on the flip side of that, I think Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin, man, right now, once again, are just killing it. And see, he's able to sell 2 10-win seasons the last 3 years, which he gets that next year. He's a playoff team. And a lot of SEC teams right now outside of Bama, Georgia, maybe Tennessee, they can't sell that in the portal. And the Grove, the Ole Miss collective there, has shown that it's not afraid to spend some money. So that's always key.
Hey, Lane, let me give you some advice. Don't tell anybody you're only going to be around for 2-3 more years.
See, we always say that, but then all of a sudden these big jobs that open, Lane's not a realistic candidate for any of them. Maybe Florida, maybe Alabama if Saban leaves.
Well, I was referencing Spurrier in 14. Well, I'll be here another 2-3 years.
2 to 3 more years again.
Did he say 2 or 3? Coach, I don't think I'm going to come to Carolina anymore.
Yeah, there you go.
Neither is every other player on this.
A&M not going through a rebuild next year, I think it'll be good for Carolina because you look at
they need to go through a rebuild. Yeah. So Florida. I mean, what about the Gators? I mean,
they're not on the schedule.
Well, I know. I'm just talking about in the transfer portal. They've lost 16 players. They haven't added one yet.
Yeah, they lost Hensley, who's their top defensive player, who's probably going to sign with Ole Miss. And when Florida is unable to retain their best players, and they lose them to a program that historically is lower than them in Ole Miss, that's a bad sign for Napier. And then they're bringing back Graham Mertz, which the fan base is kind of they've sold their stock on Graham Mertz. They want to see DJ Lagway,
who may end up at Clemson.
Right.
Golly, I guess this time
next year,
next year, Jamie Chadwell will be the new head football coach in Gainesville. Might as well prepare ourselves for this.
No, they're not smart enough to hire him. They'll hire some other guy that could be a recruiter.
Oh, Jimbo. They'll hire Jimbo.
Oh, that would be bad.
Y'all know the SEC loves its incestual relationship, so they'll definitely hire a former SEC staff.
It'll be Mark Stoops. Mark Stoops will take that one.
Yeah,
it'll definitely be that, man. Ooh, shoot, golly, man. That's,
Brad, any reaction to the schedule release last night? What'd you think about the Gamecocks draw and anything else that stood out to you?
I'll say this, man. I don't want to single him out, but SEC Network host Peter Burns said that after the show, and he has a job to do. He's the SEC guy, but he said that this is the first time that all SEC schedules have been evenly balanced out. And I'm looking at the Gamecock schedule thinking 3 consecutive top 10 teams potentially in Ole Miss, Alabama, and Oklahoma. I don't know, man. I think next year's schedule might look similarly to 2020 where the bad coaches in the league are going to get exposed in this new SEC. But you look at Texas' schedule, man, it's cake. It couldn't be easier for the Longhorns in their first season, almost a shoe-in to make the 12-team playoff. If I'm a Gamecock fan, I'll say this though: the 12-team playoff has certainly increased the likelihood that if Shane can get to a 9-3 or a 10-2 later in his tenure here, Gamecocks are in the 12-team playoff.
I 100% agree. I mean,
I agree with Texas.
Yeah,
not easy. It's a very
that's what JC was saying. And then the flip side of that, the final 5 games of the season for the Gators. Oh, whoa, Brad. Have you seen that?
I've seen it. They only have 1 game against a non-Power 5 team. I mean, even the non-conference next year is against UCF.
Yeah,
who
scheduled that? Who scheduled that?
That's the hell. So the odds makers when those early win totals come out in like March or April, it's going to be about 5.5 again for Florida. And if Napier has another 5-7, he's out.
Well, he's going to have an 0-5. I mean, they've got Georgia and Jacksonville. Then they got to go to Texas. Those are both losses. And then they host LSU. We'll see.
And if Florida State signs Cam Ward, Florida State's a top 10 team.
And prior to that, they welcome Lane Kiffin to the Swamp. So that's crazy.
So one thing about Ole Miss, Jackson Dart, their quarterback, has been kind of coy on whether he's coming back or not. And if they win the bowl game and he has a big game and he goes to the draft, all of a sudden Ole Miss is in the quarterback market and all the big names are gone.
You don't think Spencer Sanders would step in that situation, or Walker Howard, or the guys they got?
So Walker would probably be the starter. I think Spencer would be on his 6th season, and he didn't fare too well as Dart's backup this season.
No, he didn't look good at all. He's like, when he got in a couple of games, I was like, this is the guy that set a record at Oklahoma State. On Oklahoma, though, Brad, Oklahoma's lost their entire offensive line to the transfer portal. Did you know this?
Yeah, and
is that real? Seriously?
And they're
starting their whole their starting offensive line. All of them are in the portal.
And I'll have a first-year quarterback, a whole new offensive line, and a first-year offensive coordinator.
It's brutal. And Caden Green, their best returning offensive lineman, who portaled yesterday, I was told there's a bidding war between Missouri and Oregon. So Oklahoma's not going to retain them. That's for sure.
That's crazy. And it's like, so if South Carolina goes to Norman, and that's always going to stink. But and I talked to a coach that is on a Big 12 staff this year that used to coach in the SEC, and he said there's a big difference between Texas and where they're at talent-wise. And he said Oklahoma to him just is not ready to go. Like, and I trust him. So
that makes me feel a lot better because I've already got hotel rooms in Norman.
Yeah, I was told there's some casinos around that part of the country in Oklahoma. So
yeah, I think Oklahoma's probably, they're probably an 8-4-ish team next season. And sort of
perfect
inside the industry here, Brent Venables now has a reputation that he doesn't overpay for talent through NIL in the portal and recruiting. So I think it's interesting that Brent sort of has the Dabo mentality, and the guys I sign, I'm going to develop, and we're going to be elite, regardless of what the ratings and all that say.
Well, it's a lot easier to be elite when you're playing